Hi, Susan from Worldpeacefull again. I wasn't going to do a video, but I've just decided to because there was an amazing butterfly that was flying over around the bushes over there. It was a bit different. I wanted to have a closer look at it actually, but it flew away. I have a little dog with me as well. Who's my friend? And projector. Sounds, it's a little dog, it sounds very vicious, but it's not. It's very funny. Brr. The desire to defend its territory. It is instinctual, isn't it? Just sitting with nature in all its forms. See, nature isn't just the plants and the trees and the wind and the sky and the sun, the planet, the DNA, the biology, the species system. It's not just that. It's whatever turns up in your life. That's part of nature. We create the lives and times that we're moving through. Thought is very powerful, and thought creates what we see, and it creates our life, what we believe. Because life, they say, is like a photocopier. What you put out comes back. That's why I often say in my videos that very statement, because it's the literal truth. What you put out comes back. Life is a mirror. Can you stop long enough to see that you are at cause in respect of what's happening in your life? And rather than judging it in a negative place, stay centered in that moment and just observe it. What is it? What does it mean to you? What is it evoking in you? If it's evoking something negative, then that means something's unhealed. Would it be possible to own that in your life, that those things that make you feel bad are aspects of yourself you're not prepared to accept? You might say, I'm not of this and I'm not of that. And there may be truth in that, you may not be. When it sits on the side of denial, then it's something, the denial becomes a protective mechanism so that you can't look at that aspect of yourself because you're not prepared to accept it. There could be trauma around it too. So nature is over and above and beyond and inclusive of everything. Everything is nature. And it's really an amazing revelation in truth. Because we tend to separate the two. We see ourselves in cities, for those living in a city, and then we see nature as out there somewhere. But in actual fact, it's all of it. What came out of that origin of a natural impulse, which created everything, some call it the Big Bang, was the ability to create whatever. And that did come out of nature, but there's distortions obviously in the way that it unfolds, because we're living in a reality that oscillates between fear and love. And the fear is the great distorter. Love is really a harmony. That's why when we feel love towards something, it may be genuine or not. It might just be we're believing our beliefs based on what's been programmed into us, that other is working, they're successful, they've got a family, they belong, and we may accept that person on that basis and feel love for them. But is it real love? The real love is when you can accept someone who's homeless, unemployed, unattractive, what would be perceived as a failure, even obnoxious. If you were able to look upon them with love, unconditional love, which means no conditions are applied to it, then you start to get closer to the idea of what true love is. To love the unlovable, it's been said, right? For those of you of a religious perspective, can you love the unlovable? When I was a clown, definitely, I clowned in refugee camps, and just thinking back to I have been to prisons. I went to a refugee prison though. It was a former prison. I've worked in a prison as well. Definitely I've been on the street and expressed love to people who most people would avoid. Because I'm moving fairly quickly through the crowd, I don't actually have time to allow belief systems that have been programmed into me to stop me from interacting. I'm moving so quickly that I don't have time to think, which is a very good thing. Because what it means is I greet everybody in a space of love, and it's unconditional love that I experienced. It's not unlike the garden. I'm just looking at the garden behind me, where everything is in the garden. Now, that's not to say that some plants don't, typically exotic plants or foreign plants, come into that species system where there hasn't been sufficient time for adaptation. They may well, end up becoming like a weed in that system and destroy a lot of it too, when it's not compatible with the system. So there's always time that's needed in order for things to become, in a sense, absorbed into that bigger system. Because we don't understand nature very well, we introduce species into systems which can be very harmful to the natives that have taken billions of years, or millions of years really, to evolve. So how does that work with humans? It takes time for us to adjust to difference. Not unlike nature, we need time. We're still in a world that sees nation states, and upon that divider of nation states, we see differences, and we see better than or less than on the basis of how much people actually have in terms of wealth. We haven't really explored the real wealth of all nations, which comes down to the creativity in those cultures, the wealth of generosity. In typically what I found, the poorest countries were the most generous because they had an empathy for not having much, and they all share, you see. So those conditions of poverty actually evoked within people a desire to share more. And so that was the real wealth that compensated for what was perceived as poverty. And that poverty really generated from a mindset or mindsets where wealth is seen as materialism. In ancient cultures, before mechanization, before agriculture, there was wealth in wisdom. I read today a statement talking about the treasury of wisdom. I really like that. The treasure of that wisdom came from people. Does that then create a change in the way that we see people? Do they suddenly become of value because there's a treasury of wisdom sitting there? For me personally, when I was teaching peace to children, I can always remember asking the children to look at the person next to them and tell them something about them that they liked. Now, some children had real difficulty with this. And I tried to keep it really simple, like even if you like their shoes or, I allowed that material sort of superficial like to come in. It sounds like likes, doesn't it, on Facebook? Some children had struggled to find anything about the other that they liked. Other kids were able to easily praise that child that was next to them. And what I taught the kids was that the real wealth inside them came from their ability to see the wealth in another. Their wealth came from the ability to see the wealth in the other. If they're struggling with it, what it actually means in truth is that they couldn't see it in themselves. Because life is a mirror, you see. What you see in another is in yourself. So rather than that other feeling like, they didn't see anything good in me, I mustn't be any good, which is typically the narrative, it was never that. It was that the other couldn't see it in themselves in order to give it to the other. There's also universal laws around what you give to another returns to the self. This is, I've just got the words E equals MC squared. Energy equals matter, light squared. So what you give to another comes back to yourself, so that's the energy side of it. It's an energy response. It may not come directly from that other to you, but life will provide a corresponding generosity back. I'll give you an example of my own life being in a homeless situation. I use the words homeless because technically that's what I am, although I'm at home wherever I go. So I actually feel very grounded within myself in this situation. But then admittedly, I'm not sitting on the street with my hand out in the city, which could easily happen if life wasn't sending me an abundance, because I feel abundant, you see. I don't feel poor inside myself. Although I note others behave differently towards me if they think that I'm homeless, and if I told them that I was a successful business person doing X, Y, Z, let's say I told them I was a market analyst, they would be impressed by that. I'll be treated totally differently and I'd be invited. But I like to say to people that I'm homeless because I like to see what they do. I'm not seeking for friendship. Although I'm a friend to everyone, I don't need it. I mean, there's been times in my life when I have. It's typically when I've been bullied, or had the experience of being bullied. That's when I really needed someone to talk to. But because of my own inner wealth, I'm finding I'm needing people less and less, if at all. Because I don't believe that's true friendship, you see, is to need someone. A neediness is saying that you've got something that I want. We don't want that. We want to celebrate the abundance within each in a celebration together. But if that other decided they wanted to leave, could you let them leave with love? So that generosity I'm talking about, because I'm just going back to why I brought up the homelessness, it was really to do with what I've noticed coming back into my life. I've been given a lot, actually, by certain individuals, to my surprise, and love was always there with those people. If they don't love you, they give you nothing, and they'll judge you. They'll give you a judgment. So you do get something. You get judged. That I find amusing. As my mother said, when she went to England, she came into money. Suddenly she was treated differently because she had money. People were wanting the money. It wasn't that she'd changed. But when there was no more money, it's a whole different ballgame. And that's because we've built up our belief systems on value around money or digital currency or Bitcoin, whatever it is. It's the ability to procure material things through some object. Could be a digital object, could be Just sort of Internet of Things came to my mind then. Whatever it is, you have an ability to exchange for things that either enhance your life, support your life, expand your life, and we call that wealth. We calculate, particularly the things we calculate as GDP, things and services. Whereas the experience I'm having, because I'm not living on much money, the things that become important to me is having enough food. Food is typically number one. Shelter is important, but I can easily go and stay in a tent. I've got a tent. So shelter is secondary. I've got a tent. Having fuel is important because I need to be able to move from one location to another. And a few friends sort of understanding what I'm about and there if I do need to stay somewhere for a little while. These become the priorities, survival, I guess you'd call it. Basics, real basics. So what it does within me in terms of the real wealth that develops within me is a great gratitude for what turns up. And because I don't have the means to make it turn up, I don't have the ability to rent the house I'm staying in, but that came to me. So I feel the gratitude of being able to stay somewhere that's really lovely and to keep working on humanity and peace, which is what I do, for everyone, not just, there is no us against them, it's about us. I'm very clear about that. But there's great diversity in that us that sees itself differently, and we're all coming at life from different levels of consciousness. And what that really means is what we're able to see or feel or be aware of. It's not a better than or a less than if somebody's more aware than someone else. There is no elite status to any of this. It's just simply an experience one's having, which is the purpose of their life. So let's say that someone is having an experience like I am of homelessness. It's going to bring up experiences that would not be possible if I worked as a professional market analyst or an economist. Not possible. I could talk about poverty. I could talk about unemployment rates. I could analyse statistics infinitum. I could do cross tabulations. Let's have a look at the poor, typical age. Let's look at gender. Let's look at skill base. Let's look at income. Let's look at maybe some belief systems if I want to look at it as an analyst. But if I want to look at it for what it truly is in truth, if I want to really know it, I have to live it. People who experience empathy, and the ones that I've found to be the most generous, have typically had difficult lives, interestingly enough, because they know what it's like through their experience. They're not just doing good, they are acting on what they know. So they give. Some of them give, well, all of the people that I'm certainly knowing are very much, I would call them world servers. They serve people. They're in service. They're still learning about serving themselves too. So I've talked about service to self in some of my videos and service to others. Interestingly enough, there's a little bit of a hybrid of the two in order to gain balance. It's a hybrid of the two. In order to be able to serve others, you have to serve yourself. I couldn't serve humanity if I was starving. I'd have to eat. My biology would force me to go eat. I'd have to get food. That would be top of mind. So going back to a lived experience, it's not analytical. In other words, it's not up here in the head where we're trying to conceptualize poverty or homelessness. You actually understand what it's like to feel a bit of panic if you don't know where you're going to stay. And I've had those experiences not only in this year and a half that I've been without a home, nearly 2 years, coming up to 2 years. In another 3 months, I'll have been 2 years without a home. And I've been around a year and a half without income, any permanent income that would be able to sustain me. In recent times, my mother assisted when she recognised that my situation. But prior to that, she had judgment around it. And those are the barriers that those who don't have lived experience of not having income or not having a place to live, they just can't understand it. They're not trying to be unkind. I do have a lot of compassion for them, not caring. I do, because I know that they don't know what they don't know. So how can I sit in judgment of them? I can't. How many times have I walked past? I just put myself in their shoes. But I would say at the same time, people could be a little bit kinder. I'm seeing selfishness, definitely. So where they have the opportunity to take some steps, they haven't. They've ignored it. And that's the way it is. And because I come from a different consciousness in the sense that I believe that what happens is meant to happen, I'm not saying you should be giving me X, Y, Z, although I might look at it from another perspective and say, well, can we expand services to those who have no money and who aren't on welfare? Because they're the ones who obviously are in the most need. See, the reflection of society comes from homelessness and unemployment. That's why there's such a focus by government on it, because really its kudos comes from its ability to seek to help the most vulnerable. And if it's not doing that, then people will say, well, what's the point of government? Why are we paying taxes? See, it's justification for that. But I see even within those bureaucratic structures, there's no understanding whatsoever of the reality of unemployment. There tends to be victim blaming in it. And that's a form of denial because economic policies were unable to fulfill the objective of full employment. So rather than really address the fact that they've not been able to create full employment, they tend to say you should be self-reliant, or they tend to say you're bludgeoning off the system, you're getting a free ride, and on goes the sort of this covert form of bullying in actual fact when it's repeated, because it's undermining. Undermining is a feature of bullying. When you're undermining someone, you're seeking to disempower them in actual fact, and you're blaming them for their situation. Often, if you go for a job, for example, I always laugh at this. The employer, if they do write back to you, they may not because they get inundated now, they might say that you have failed, to get this job, or you have been unsuccessful. And those are the words, you have been unsuccessful. I always think, no, you have been because you failed to see me. It's not my fault you couldn't see me. Now, I might not turn up in the narrative that you expect, but that's not my failure. It's called diversity. So I don't buy into those lines of I'm a failure because I didn't get the job. I look at it differently and say I wasn't meant to get the job. I know when I was on welfare, I did genuinely seek to honour that obligation, and because I'm into truth, you see. So I did genuinely apply, but I knew after 1,000 jobs that it wasn't working. But because there's no good communication between the job seeker and the agency and the government, because of a certain perception around that, you're not able to get the message through unless you do what I did and wrote a report, which I did. I analysed it. And it was good for me because I had to really look into the value of meaningful work. Are we all just meant to take the first job that comes, or is our happiness important? And so we've got on the one hand GDP, but that GDP may be a non-event if it's an employer picking you up because they're getting a wage subsidy and then dropping you off when that's no longer valid. Or an employer picking you up because they can get you for below poverty wages. How does that benefit you if you can't rent a place? How does that benefit society? So it creates all sorts of, this idea of cost minimisation, and I know what it is. It's to do with economics. Business sees labour as an input to production, and its goal is to minimise costs. Now, it typically sees those in the lower service sort of roles that don't have significant qualifications around them, that are fairly straightforward jobs. They see them as worthless, literally. Those who are in demand, those persons in demand who have professional status, will go through a different recruitment channel, as distinct from the unemployed, who are channeled through job provider system. Those in the professional, if they're just transiting from one professional job to another, they'll go in through a recruiter, and that recruiter will make them a nice cup of coffee. They'll be sitting in very lovely surroundings. They'll be treated with respect. They will not be forced into the next job because that recruiter said you have to take this job. Like everybody would expect, they would express an interest in that job, and the recruiter would then put it to the employer, and the employer, if they think it's a match through their human resource management team, you would be offered a job. And that's the way that process works. But in the lower socioeconomic, it's a whole different reality. Those people are made to sign job plans which have activities on them to keep them working, even whilst, because they're taking an unemployment benefit, it becomes what they call mutual obligation, which is a business ethos. If you're taking money from us, you're going to work for it. That's essentially it. As distinct from Social Security, which has a safety net metaphor, which basically means we are ensuring you have payment to survive so that you don't end up on the street. It's a social policy. But when it becomes conditional welfare and it links to jobs, any job, they don't call it employment now, they're calling it jobs or jobless. So that's casualised labour we're dealing with here. So that person might only pick up a few days a week, and that's nothing to live on. They'll definitely be homeless unless they've got a partner or some sort of social situation happening around them where others can assist them. They could easily wind up on the street. If they don't have supportive families, they're in trouble. So this casualisation of labour, as contrasted by the professionalism where they're getting paid more and more, people, I can remember when $400,000, this is what the Prime Minister was paid, I think. I don't think he's paid that now. Is quite a small amount if you're in the upper echelons of business. You could be starting off at $1 million beyond. It's very interesting. It's a whole different worldview, and it's a whole different world experience based on materialism. So again, going back to that idea of the experience of wealth, I have far more time to spend working on the things that I love in this situation that I'm in. And what I love is humanity. What I love is peace, not as an idealistic, although the word ideal is really the vision of what we would consider to be really best outcome in truth, or highest outcome is an ideal, but it often gets confused with idealism, like it's a great fantasy, but let's get real. It's actually not. It's a vision is what idealism is. Because I've come from an economics background and market research, and I've also worked in a lot of companies, I've travelled a lot. I've got a fairly holistic worldview now. I'm 54, I've been around, I've seen a lot. And this point in my life, which is quite typical when you're in your 50s, is kind of like a restock, a retake, stock take. It could be a stock take of your life. Although I've done a lot of reflection already. But this moment really is for me to bring the wisdom that I've learned in my life to benefit the society. And that's not unusual. So my real wealth is that I have plenty of time to work on what I think is important for humanity and to be open to learning new things as I start to express more and more who I am, as I become more acquainted with who I am as a person who would be in the age group of elders. The wisdom I've accumulated has really been through my search for truth. But everyone has equal wisdom in reality. It's just that most people aren't focusing there. They're not focusing on your inner growth. For those of a religious persuasion, you would say your soul, which is the intuitive feelings that come up where you actually know something. You might be walking down a street and you might go, I just know to go this way. Or you might meet someone and you go, I just know this person. This person's really familiar to me. Or someone might say something and you go, I know that. I get it. That's soul. That's the soul within. Or actually the soul's beyond the physical body from what I've learned. It's inner knowledge is the higher knowledge, intuitive knowledge. I mean, I remember my mum was very good with intuition. She used to go, she'd trust people or not trust people, or she'd know you're lying. You know, she'd be able to call people on stuff, and she was right. A lot of women have that faculty. Sometimes we get it wrong, but that's okay. That's being human. But the feeling state is the one that's often in our civilizations across the world been suppressed. It's to do with the gender dynamic. It's to do with vulnerability too. If you express your feelings, particularly if you're a man, other men will look upon you as a bit weak, or they might call you a girl. I've heard that expression used with disrespect, which is not respectful of women. So that feeling state is really the real fear beyond is vulnerability. If you show how you really feel, then people feel exposed. And because we're in a world where there's a lot of wheeling and dealing, a lot of negotiating, a lot of being seen to be, a lot of the metaphorical selfie happening where you want to be seen in a certain light, but you're not really being who you are. And yet that feeling state is what connects you to who you are, which is your own truth. That's the real navigator. I know, having been in the situation that I'm in, without money and without a fixed home and uncertainty around all of that, is I'm learning to trust my intuition. Intuition. So it's inner. Tuition means I'm being taught from within, which is the truth of it. Because I've got nowhere to go with this, I can't just go and enrol. I tried to, funnily enough, enrol in free TAFE as a homeless person, and no acceptance of that at this point. They may surprise me. I've tried for 3 months to enrol. I was going to study mental health because of what happened in my own life. I also want to help other people. In fact, that's the primary reason I want to have a look at this subject matter, because I can see that the discord in our society is growing. People are suffering mental health issues because they're not getting the love they need. So I would have liked to have studied that. I did put that request to the Premier. I did have a woman contact me who was the head of the technical colleges, TAFE, further education. And they had some viewpoint, but I wasn't directly communicated with by email, which would have helped a lot more. Instead, I got a standard letter, and then I have to go through a review process. It's just ridiculous. And all I'm asking for is a waiving of $288 because I have no money. However, if that was agreed to, then I could get on to welfare, which is to do with study. I have a conscientious objection with the unemployment welfare because I believe there's corruption in the system. That's why I stepped out. I don't just believe it, I know it. I've done the research. So I can't, because I'm into peace, I can't align with anything that I think is corrupt on any level, because that would go against my values, which is the purpose of my life is to live my values. So if I want a world that's not corrupt, I can't engage in anything that is. So that's why I became homeless and without income, because I refused to take it. I'm also very much in alignment with democracy and having the right to say no to something that I think is harmful. And what I have experienced is a compliance type system which has no room for the rights of people. So it brings up human rights issues where people do not have the right to say no to something they think is not in their interests. Well, I disagree with that. I think every human being has a sovereign right to say no to something if they think it's of harm. So that's what created that problem for me in respect of not having the money to pay the for free TAFE, $288, so it's not free. Although they would argue, well, it's a lot freer than it was because they also charged a lot. They went through an experience of, a lot more upfront fees at the TAFE level. This is tertiary education. Technical and further education is what TAFE stands for. So that was very funny, very interesting. And because I'm in the flow of life, I just accept it. It is what it is. It just gives me more information on, again, how homeless people are treated. They're not even given any empowerment so they can get themselves out of poverty. So it shows me there's a real disconnect between the society and those who are falling between the cracks. There's a huge disconnect. And a lack of compassion, which one would think would naturally be there, is not. So if you're wondering why people are sitting on the street, it's because people don't care about them. They're not all drug addicts. I've met not that many of them, but I've certainly met a few of them. And they're not all on drugs. Many have had mental health issues. They've had trauma in their lives. They've been kicked out of their place. They've had dysfunctional upbringings. Some are on drugs, that's true, but then they should be picked up immediately and put into some sort of place where they can, detox. They need to detox. No one should be on the street in a wealthy society like Australia, not one. There should be not one person sitting there. Now, society has to ask itself deep questions around why are they on the street? Because what the government's sending out as a message to the public is that they don't deserve our care because we're not helping them. In fact, they're being punished. If they're non-compliant with the system, they're being punished. And that is not reflective of a democratic society where that safety net under the Australian Constitution, Section 51, subsection 23A, that is for social security, which means not one person should be on the street. And I certainly remember when I was young, I don't recall seeing anyone on the street when CES was around, which was the Commonwealth Employment Service that was run by the government. Not one. I didn't see anyone on the street. I remember it starting to grow when I was in around my mid-20s. I just remember starting to see people on the street. So that was reflecting the economic changes and ideological changes within government as well. But certainly in my worldview, if I was designing society, I would create an egalitarian society as a real proposition. The Incas, the Peruvian Incas in South America were an egalitarian society. Interestingly enough, the Indian society, and that is, I'm talking India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, that area, the Indus civilization, was also based on egalitarianism. Of course, it changed over time. The caste system did away with that egalitarianism, but in its origins, it was actually an egalitarian society. And that means equal. It doesn't mean same, it means equal opportunity. It means we don't judge and favour or disfavour people on the basis of a characteristic, which has its underlying underpinnings in discrimination. It means I don't even need to know you. I cast you as a this, therefore you are excluded from XYZ. That's discrimination. a very, very excellent educator, if you're interested, is Jane Elliott. She's a US educator who developed the Blue-Eyed series, which I've blogged about on my blog, Pieces Our True Nature. She divided her class by eye colour. It was based on Nazi Germany's Mengele experiments. She used eye colour because it was Aryan race versus, and this could be quite topical right now, given we're seeing the rise of the far right. It would be very advisable, actually. We've got an independent MP, Fanning. He might be interested in this. I highly recommend he has a look at Jane Elliott's Blue-Eyed series and what the dividing of the class into blue-eyed and brown-eyed did to the children and how it impacted on their ability to succeed, particularly in exams. They actually became less confident when they were undermined and bullied. There was more conflict. The playground, you can map it out as a global map. There was more fighting in the playground on the basis of these divisions. The children who were the superior children did really well. They did excellent in their exams and they were really boosted psychologically. They felt more confident. Now, when I was teaching peace in schools, my Real Hope program, if you want to have a look at it, go to www.worldpeacefull.com, look at school programs, then go to anti-bullying, and you'll get a bit of an idea of Real Hope. It's a very, very deep program, but it's excellent. The Jane Elliott style of work I incorporated into my program, and I divided the class by eye colour. I was teaching as a clown because prior to all the hoo-ha around clowns through the Hollywood films, where they have turned them into something frightening, prior to all of that, clowns were a wonderful symbol for children because children like to play and clowns like to play. Those of us who have been clowns would say that it's the most incredibly unifying experience you could ever have. You see everyone as one. Your only intention is to bring joy. You don't hassle people, you step back, but you play, you might juggle, you might muck around. So children tend to relate to that really, really well. And having that as part of a values-based program in a classroom was very, very powerful because I used to tell jokes, kids could relax. I had brainstorming sessions where the kids could actually tell me what they think a value meant. When I say take responsibility, what does it mean? What does responsibility mean? I was teaching it as the ability to respond. You can do something. It means you have power. Empathy, stand in someone's shoes instead of judging that other party, like the homeless and unemployed or even the rich, you know, at the other end. Rather than judging them, they are me. Learning to stand in their shoes. What would I do if I was in their position? Probably similar. Awareness, noticing, become aware. It's also becoming still, which I typically do in my videos. The stillness is tapping into still silence, and there's an awareness that comes with that. It's also noticing. Notice your society. You don't plug in and disconnect from people. I actually unplug and connect. I'm very interested in the people. I do want to make eye contact and say hello to people as part of that social glue that doesn't alienate or isolate people, as part of a natural community. I always smile at people. Or I even said hello to a woman yesterday across the street. She was pushing a pram. I waved at her. And I just said, "How are you? Beautiful day." And she responded and laughed. She was happy. Spoke to another guy who was from the Philippines. He was actually watering his garden, and the little doggy that I have with me got dirty, so I got him to wash its feet. And he said, "Will you be my friend?" And it was an innocent statement. He'd only been in the country 6 months. I said, "Yeah, sure." I said, "I come past here, I can have a chat with you." And I will. That's community building. You know, he wasn't confident to get out and catch a train into the city. So I encouraged him. You have to be independent. So the program in schools, the Jane Elliott stuff, I did as a peace clown, and I divided the class by eye colour. Only blue-eyed children could be clowns, is what I said. Brown-eyed and green-eyed couldn't be. So they were held back by the teacher whilst I did silent whispers with the kids that had blue eyes. And we had a lot of fun because the other kids, they loved that game. They were really annoyed, even though they knew it was a sort of a teaching. They were still annoyed that they were left out because they don't like the feeling of exclusion. And see, I'm teaching empathy through that experience. That's why experiential education is very profound. It's far more impactful than theoretical. You need theoretical to support practical. That's why the technical colleges were practical. You learn better through it, but our society tends to value that less and value the intellect more. I think the practical education is far, far more inclusive of higher intelligences. So what I was building into my course was that idea of how does it feel to be the one who's included and the other group that's excluded. How do we perform on that basis in our lives? Those who are made to feel that they're superior, better than others, they all help each other, off we go. Those who are seen as the losers of society, we don't want to be around that because something within us is afraid of being typecast with that group because we get rejected by the bigger group. So that was a great experience for me to teach and to observe how the children reacted to it. And the brown-eyed, green-eyed children did not like being excluded. They hated it. And even though they knew it was a game, it really affected them. So then I put the question to them all once we'd debriefed about what it was like to be included and valued and, special, and how it felt to be excluded, isolated and undervalued. We come together after that and we talked about what we can do in the playground to make that playground more inclusive of children. What do we do if a child's sitting by themselves? We include them. What if they're being bullied? What if they're from another ethnic group? What if they're disabled? What if they've got a stutter? What if they're unattractive? How do we make them feel included in our society? So that's how you teach it. So that's why the homelessness is good for me, because I'm actually getting to experience social exclusion. Even professionals who I'm more qualified than, even in the homelessness services, did not embrace me at all. They actually avoided me and they didn't answer me straight up when I communicated with them. I'm talking over email. Face to face, they certainly didn't rush over to see if I was okay and if they could do anything. I saw that very clearly. And then I started to contemplate, maybe they see this as their job for whatever. Well, I think now, looking back, the reason they didn't embrace me is because they couldn't make money out of me because I wasn't on Centrelink. They also saw me as assertive and I was older than them too. Maybe they just thought, keep away from her. Or maybe they thought, who knows, she'll be, she's like us. There could well be a lack of knowledge about older women, 50 plus, who look like they'd be fine, who are actually without anything. You still got to reach out across that divide and communicate with that person. So what I found was I just didn't feel any resonance. I didn't feel any desire to seek out those welfare agencies. I did try the salvos, but I just didn't feel there was no follow-up. There was no real concern. That's how I experienced it. And that's not to say there aren't those within those organisations who do feel concern. I'm just simply reflecting how I experienced it. And if anything, it repelled me from it. I thought, no, go and stay in a tent if you have to. You will find your way. And because I've travelled a lot, I've been very independent. I'm not going to come under another's authority and have my rights removed again. The whole reason I stepped out of the welfare system was because my rights were not being respected and I was concerned about corruption. So it was It was actually a duty of care. It was citizenship that made me move. So when I saw the whole homelessness, even unemployment situation is so, it makes you feel like you're much lower. And I'm not, I'm equal. I saw them disempower, not empower. Empowerment says you can do it. You know, what do you want? Empowerment invites your response. Empowerment values you equally. Empowerment helps you to develop strengths so that you can reach the goals that you're setting for yourself. To tell a person you have to follow our goals is not going to work, because people will always work for the things they want. That's how the whole economy functions. People typically go to work because they want the money in order to buy the house, to do the things they really want. But if they didn't have an agreement to do that job, they have to be in agreement to do it to start with. If you force them into it, like a slave labour, you're going to get resentment from that group. You're not going to get prosperity. You are not going to get innovation. They're going to put on the anchors and slow it right down, because they're not going to give you anything. You have to work with people. You have to really find out what they're wanting, and you have to include them in the process that creates these models that supposedly are to help get jobs. So going back full circle, and I'll finish in a moment because I'm getting up to the hour. Going back full circle to nature. It is not our nature to collaborate with things we don't agree with. It's not our nature. We'll resent it and resist it. It's not our nature to be unkind to one another. If you look at children, children are really quick. They look out for each other. You know, they'll look, oh, there's another child. I'll go play. They don't go, oh, do I like that child or not? They don't think like that. They go, oh, great, a playmate. And off they go and play, because they haven't learned all the beliefs that divide them from that other. That child could be Indian. That child could be from Africa. That child could be disabled. The child doesn't see that. The child just goes, playmate, someone to play with, because it's their nature to come together. People are not slaves either. It's not their nature to be slaves. The reason they collaborate is because it's their nature to work together. They don't like being excluded. It's their nature. The reason they don't complain, you know, there's a lot of their nature in that, in trying to work with others. It's very natural to people to work together. But when you divide people off, when people get sort of stimulated with self-interest, and the systems have created the self-interest, the economic system of profit maximising, of going, and self-interest, of course, is part of human nature. Like, I'm doing what I'm doing out of self-interest, in the sense of I'm very interested in humanity. So I'm following that pursuit. So that in a form is a self-interest, but it's not at the exclusion of others. So if we're designing into our systems, just do it for yourself and forget everybody else, not your problem, that's not our true nature. Our true nature is more akin to family. It's more akin to groups. It's a group psychology. We really love being together. We love talking. We love mixing it up. That is our true nature. We are in a garden of great variety. The harmony is, in a sense, not having all these rules imposed on people, but actually inspiring people to go for their highest good, educating people in universal values, which is what I was doing, so that those really positive, virtuous aspects are developed. We don't just leave children to the side in front of television and let them be the educator of that child. And they could be sending, and they are sending, values that are not promoting the highest good in humanity. If they're violent films and children don't see a consequence to that violence. They don't see how it harms other people. If they're getting these games sent to their iPhones and it's just been seen as that's what you do, that's programming. That's why we have programs on television. It's programming. Education is, what do you think about that program? What did you learn about that? What did you notice didn't happen? What did happen? If you were in the shoes of that character, what would you do? That's education. You're drawing out of them their own answers. That's why you ask questions, because you're drawing out the wisdom, the treasury in that child, which is the real wealth of the nation. If you do not teach critical thinking, if you do not teach positive role modeling through your own example, if you are active in deception, if it's all about the money for you, you've lost the majority of the reason why we're here. Our life is not about the money. Our life is about discovering, experiencing, expanding who we are. It's about living to our highest potential. It's not about keeping us to the lowest controllable frequency, if you like. It's not about controlling the humanity. It's about creating a blueprint of harmony in that humanity, not unlike the garden behind me, which cannot flourish without obeying universal laws. It cannot flourish without a complete harmonious system of appropriate amount of rain, appropriate amount of sunlight. Many of those green plants, as you can see, they photosynthesize, so they actually make their own food, but that happens through the sunlight. It has to be embedded in soil. That topsoil of our planet, that first inch, is what creates all the arable land of which food is produced. We have to look at the biological reconfiguration that's happening through biotechnology. We have to look down the track, not just at our immediate profits in the next 12 to 5 years, but we're talking generations down the track of what happens when that genetic code is changed. When we've had a natural system genetically modify itself over billions of years, and then we come in with the belief that we know it and that the only thing that matters is profit for a specific few, and we undermine a biological balance that's come from very, very refined and careful genetic. That change of that genetics is coming from inside the genes itself. Genes switch on, they switch off. The environment is such that certain genes will be favoured, others will not, because the biology is adapting. It has adaptation actually built into it, given change. Now, the human species is part of that species system, that ecosystem, that biological system. We also have to return to what is natural for us. Not normal, natural. And what's natural will seem not normal. You go, oh, that's weird. No, it's your natural state of being. But it's a little bit like for those of you who remember the record players, many probably won't, the young ones won't, they only know CDs. But we used to put on a record player and you'd go from one track to the next, lifting a little arm, and you'd go to the next song. They were literally tracks. So metaphorically, what I would say is something that's natural will not feel normal because you're moving from one track to another. It's like a different frequency. So it won't feel comfortable to start with. It'll seem like your whole world is being challenged by what's natural, because we've not lived in what's natural. We've only lived in what's normal. And that normality has been created through culture. It's been created through education. It's been created through hierarchies in which to organise humanity. But when we return to what's natural, many of the things we thought we need, we don't need at all. You will start to look through eyes that are very different. You will start to see everyone as yourself. You will no longer live in hierarchy where you believe you're superior to someone else or someone's superior to you. You won't be insecure about food. You'll know that life is abundant. The real, I'm just thinking GDP, gross domestic product, but I'm just thinking of it in respect of that abundance. Gross domestic profit, maybe, comes from the prophets, the actual wise ones. The real profit is that treasury of wealth, of wisdom, that has been completely marginalised as very nice to know if we're postulating with our friends over dinner, but it has to become the very foundation and basis of a redesign, or what I've called in one of my videos a recalibration of a system that's clearly not working, a system that's out of balance because we're out of balance with who we are naturally. It isn't about us and them. There is no enemy I often speak of, and I'm not saying that as an idealistic terminology. I'm saying it as a real felt experience. There's no enemy. The minute I turn you into an enemy and say you should be like me, you shouldn't. You should be like you. I can express, though, my wisdom. You take it on or you don't. You resonate or you don't. But no one should be in any way reduced because of expressing what feels right to them. We should not be undermining or bullying those who are trying to share another possibility with humanity for its highest good. Our true nature is to work for our highest good, the highest good of all. It's not about looking at the other and labeling them as a this or a that, or something that has to be gotten rid of. We have to face the very things that are causing us discord because it's coming from within us. It's something unhealed, and that's the nature of the imbalance that is happening within humanity. When you're balanced, you will include everybody in that world family. When you're balanced, you will not fall into fear when crises hit, because that balance will enable you to act on what comes next. The reaction is when you're out of touch with creation. Creativity, to create, to react, these words are interchangeable. So when you see first, you will create rather than react. You can create a pathway forward. What is natural means that you can actually, what you think about, you bring about. You can create it. This is why I said in the previous video that, the one before actually, on security, on global surveillance, we are not at loss. There is no loss. We actually have full power, all of us. But it's this belief that there's a loss that is creating all this conflict, the reaching for power, for example. What we have to understand is by depleting something here, we're creating an imbalance over there. It's a little bit like that idea of the butterfly effect, which is what brought me to this video, was the butterfly I saw. You've got to understand we're all connected. No matter what you do, we're all connected. So think about, or give consideration to, the thoughts that you're thinking, and are they working in harmony for the greater good of humanity? Are they coming from negative space where you feel you have to grab for something because there's something missing within you? You have to look at that, because that's what is out of balance with your humanity. So I might leave it there. I hope that was of service to you. With it, I send you great love. great peace, and to reconnect with your true nature. Thanks. Bye.